The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's session titled Conversations with GIA, Seeing Older Adults as Assets with Intergenerational Programs. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. When you joined today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce John Feather, CEO of Grantmakers in Aging, and our moderator for today's webinar. John?
Thank you, Clara, and welcome to all of you who have joined us today. We have almost 300 registered for today's webinar, which shows the great interest across the country in this important topic. As always, we want to thank the John A. Hartford Foundation for their continuing support of today's webinar, as well as our entire webinar series. Well, there has been much discussion around older adults in need during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many older adults are also actively volunteering and giving back to their communities. Today's conversation will focus on the 65-plus experience during this crisis and how organizations are putting the skills and talents of older adults to work. We are so pleased to be joined today by three experienced panelists: Trent, CEO of the Eisner Foundation; Joel Arquillos, Executive Director of 826LA; and Nahtahna Cabanes, the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Director of RSVP at LA Works. Thank you all so much for being with us today. As was mentioned earlier, you can enter your questions for our panelists at any time in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. I will collect these and read them to the panelists when we get to the Q&A portion at the end of our presentation. Trent, at this point, I'll turn it over to you for your opening comments.
Thank you, John. I'd also like to thank, of course, the John A. Hartford Foundation for sponsoring, and I want to thank each of our participants for joining us today. I know that many of us, our minds are elsewhere, but I also know that we have much to do to bring the country together, and I'm eager to continue that work, as I know you are. Next slide, please. The Eisner Foundation exists primarily to fund intergenerational programs, almost exclusively in Los Angeles and the Southland, but also a little bit around the country for some of our special programs. Next slide. The Eisner Foundation is the only U.S. funder solely dedicated to supporting intergenerational programs. We believe that intergenerational programs do more than just serve the old and the young. They also work to solve social problems. We usually talk about this in the context of breaking down ageist attitudes, but it's much broader than that. These programs also often bring community members of different ethnic backgrounds together as well. And as we unfortunately hear calls of "let grandma die" and the protesters are all thugs, this is clearly a moment when we need more connections, more understanding, and a more shared vision. Next slide, please. I know that most people on this call are very familiar with the statistics that often lay people are not aware of, but obviously our older population is growing, and social isolation is a major problem with serious health effects. As we face this unprecedented pandemic, we've been glad to see that social isolation has been widely recognized as a particularly important challenge. This is part of the reason why we do intergenerational work. We not only believe that these programs reduce social isolation, but they also leverage the many skills and talents that older adults have developed over decades of life experience. Next slide, please. Older adults have so much to give. In fact, in 2018, the year that we have the most recent data, older folks volunteered an estimated 2.2 billion hours, worth more than 53 billion in economic value to our society. About a third of baby boomers volunteer, which compares to about 26% for millennials. We also know that older adults tend to be more reliable. They stay longer with an organization than younger volunteers. They're often in it for a better reason. No one's padding their resume when you're an older volunteer working with a younger group, and they're often described as much more patient with the youth that they work with. Next slide, please. On the other side, we know that children with a caring adult in their lives, regardless of relation, perform better in school. They have fewer behavioral problems, increasing their lifetime income and reducing their dependence on the social safety net and their engagement with the criminal justice system. Older adults in volunteer roles are already filling this gap, and we urge those who are able to please support organizations doing this work so that we can put more older people back into our workforce, either as workers or volunteers. For more on this call to action, I urge you to please try and read the piece that I co-wrote last week for the Chronicle of Philanthropy with Mark Friedman, CEO of Encore.org, and Carol Larson, former CEO of the Packard Foundation, where we made the case for a massive expansion of programs that utilize older volunteers as mentors, tutors, role models, and advocates. That piece is called "Let's Make This Crisis the Grandmother of Invention." Next slide, please. So as I wrap up and we try to get to the people who are actually practicing this in the field, we do believe that bringing these two groups together, we can serve both populations efficiently, effectively, and empower and foster empathy in both generations. Next slide. Intergenerational programming can mean a wide range of things. And as a result, at the Eisner Foundation, we have several focus areas. But today, with our guests, we're going to focus on volunteering and mentorship. If those of you in the funding world have questions about any of the other areas that we focus on within the intergenerational world, please contact me. Next slide. When it comes to older volunteers, many of our grantees are organizations that serve children with an older volunteer base. As the children benefit from tutoring and mentoring and developing a relationship with a caring older adult, the volunteer also gains a sense of purpose that can help combat social isolation. In 2017, we surveyed our grantees working with older volunteers and found that these volunteers are often the most valuable to an organization. As I mentioned earlier, older volunteers are described as more reliable, more patient, and they tend to stay with an organization longer. To encourage more child-serving nonprofits to take advantage of older adults as a volunteer resource, we have compiled our grantees' successful strategies for recruiting and retaining older volunteers into a handbook, which you can find at eisnerfoundation.org/volunteer handbook. Next slide, please. Older adults are also valuable members of the workplace. Many of our grantees engage retired or semi-retired people to mentor those just beginning their careers. Others pair older adults with youth as they transition to adulthood, acting as both listener and guide. As the young people learn and grow from these relationships, the older adults also gain perspective about what younger generations are thinking and feeling. Next slide, please. So for us, why this matters is that obviously we know that the number of older adults in our society is growing every year, and this group requires increasing levels of social and financial support. Intergenerational programs can reduce that need and improve their quality of life. Children who thrive at a young age are better equipped to be successful adults and contribute to society. Leveraging these two groups as assets to help each other is an efficient and effective way to combat social problems and strengthen our communities. When older adults are involved in their community and feel a sense of purpose, it eliminates or postpones the need for the services and the interventions that we at GIA often discuss. Our sector needs to support this work as a vital part of older adult advocacy. At this point, I want to go ahead and turn it over to hopefully the people that you've heard, that you've come to hear. So Nahtahna at LA Works, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Trent. I really appreciate that. So, and I'm going to try to talk to some of the examples of the importance that older adults have played in this current moment during this time that'll highlight what Trent was mentioning. So I also want to say at the head of this that these slides were made a bit ago, so they're going to seem dated. I'm actually going to speak to the moment at the end of my section related to how older adults can play a really important role at this very moment. So my name's Nahtahna Cabanes. I'm the VP of Strategic Partnerships and the Director of the Retired and Senior Volunteer Program at LA Works. LA Works is LA's largest volunteer network. We have been around since 1992. Next slide. We strive to empower active older adults to address pressing social issues through volunteerism. We are actually a grant of the Corporation for National Community Service. They grant funds to programs throughout the country. If you are not familiar with Retired and Senior Volunteer Program, they seek out to mobilize older adults who are 55 and older in key priority areas. We've had the Los Angeles grant since 2014. Our priority areas have been employment, skill development, K through 12 education, and nonprofit capacity building. Those have been our priority areas during this time. Next slide. What I want to specifically talk about is how our RSVP members have stepped up in this moment of COVID-19 crisis, as the needs have completely shifted and pivoted quite quickly. I want to also debunk the assumption that older adults, because they are a high risk and vulnerable population, are incapable of volunteering in this moment. We have not seen that. In fact, our data indicates quite the opposite. So within the 3 months since the safer at home orders have been in place in our city, we have actually seen about 55% of our RSVP members engaged. They have volunteered at least 873 times at 22 nonprofits. So not only do we manage our own volunteer opportunities, we actually match volunteers with nonprofits in need, oftentimes with intergenerational programming at other nonprofits. So, so that has been the data we've showed. It actually is a small decrease in the volunteer engagement, but not a striking decrease given the safer at home orders. Next slide. Next slide. The other thing I want to highlight and debunked is that older adults, that this might be a younger group of older adults that are engaging. Our data actually indicates that our RSVP members are coming from all age groups to volunteer in this moment. Next slide. So I really want to highlight the programming that has been in response to our COVID crisis at the moment. So I'm going to talk to specifically 3 different programs. I really want to highlight those, but I do want to briefly mention the ones I won't be talking about. This is the dispersal of volunteers. As I said, 55% of our volunteer base is volunteering right now, and this ranks what the popularity of volunteer services have been during that time. The ones I won't be talking about are wellness checks. We've actually conducted 30,000 wellness checks for the city of Los Angeles. These are one-time checks on people who are 50 and older to make sure that they are food secure, to make sure that they are rent stable, and if they have any needs related to pharmacy deliveries or food deliveries. The other one I'm not going to be talking about is actually PPE making. That one actually has grown in popularity since these slides have been created. Those are mask making and face shield making opportunities, and they are dispersed throughout the city. And we are actually currently supplying VAs with PPE and county hospitals with PPE, so this has been a real need. And then the final one is the consultant skill-based volunteering, where we have volunteers who are at nonprofits working specifically on COVID response opportunities. We have one doing PR for an agency. We have one doing database build out. So we have several volunteers in those areas. Next slide. Next. The reason I want to highlight this slide is because I want to, a lot of people think that volunteers are sort of this absolute hero that does above and beyond what anybody else can do. And I don't want us to assume that it takes a superhero to be a volunteer. These are our community members. And this was somebody who's participating currently that we really wanted to highlight. And she says, I love volunteering because it's assisting others. The people that are recipients are really grateful for my service and know that it is something that I'm committed to. My CASA use are especially grateful. My most recent volunteer position is telesocial, which was created during the coronavirus to stay connected during the isolation. I would not change anything about my volunteer experience, but do more if I could. This individual is actually currently volunteering in 3 of our programs. So there is still tons of opportunity and lots of ways that our older adults are engaging to meet the needs of Los Angeles. Next slide. Our most popular program has been our telesocial program, which actually was piloted during the holiday season, and we actually weren't going to continue this program. This program was initially during the holiday season a way to call people who are lonely during the holidays and just say hi and check in. When the safer at home orders came into play, we realized that this would be an enormous and immediate need for homebound and isolated individuals. We grew this program immediately, and we worked in partnership with the Motion Picture and Television Fund to actually create a software that hid phone numbers so that we could do this in a secure fashion. This has actually been one of our most popular and intergenerational programs during the COVID-19 crisis. We have had 704 people express interest in this. When they have finally been trained and matched, we've actually had 163 people making social calls. Now, many might assume that the recipients of these calls are actually all older adults. That is actually not the case. One of our RSVP members is actually calling a 26-year-old individual who has been homebound and isolated. The other thing that I'd like to identify as, because this is one of our most popular programs, I'm not a researcher, but I would like to say that this really does highlight that there is a hunger for connection, and most people are more comfortable offering help than they are asking for it. But it does emphasize the need that people really want to stay socially connected. And so this has been a real success. Next slide. The other thing I want to really highlight is that a lot of our programming that was pre-COVID-19 crisis is still happening. I'm very grateful that for the 21st century, we have lots of technology available that we did not have had this happen 20 years earlier. We are still hosting webinars. Actually, the picture that you see right now on your screen is one of our older adult webinar resume building skill-based training workshop with our AmeriCorps Vista program. So this was so popular that they have asked for 3 more. These are members of our RSVP community that are doing trainings on how to build resumes. Vista AmeriCorps are just entering the workforce. And so our RSVP members who have a lifetime of skills are giving them feedback on their resumes as they enter into the workforce. We actually have 4 workshops of this this month. So this has been a very popular opportunity, intergenerational opportunity. But we are also continuing volunteer matching with unhoused families, mentorships programs. Those are happening online. Tutoring of unhoused youth, that is happening online. Foster youth advocacy is happening online. So there's a lot of engagement still happening in our communities that is just as needed. The need has not gone away. So we've had to transition to this new knowledge base and technology. Next slide. And then the final thing I want to talk about, which was something that I learned, was that food security became an immediate gap in need. And one of the reasons for this is that the volunteer base that was volunteering at many of these food banks were older adults. And when the Safer at Home order came into place, those food banks lost their entire volunteer base. Not their entire volunteer base, but quite a few. And so as the need for food security increased, the volunteer population decreased. And so there was an immediate crisis around this. I'm saying that because I want to highlight how important older adults are to the volunteer workforce that has been our city. But what we've been able to do is pivot some of our food securities opportunities at home, where people are making food and then having it delivered to our regional food banks. And we also do have safety measures in place where our older adults are still volunteering at food banks with COVID required safety measures in place. Next slide. So the last thing I really want to speak to is I really want us to identify that that older adults are a huge component of the volunteer workforce in Los Angeles. They're an intrinsic part of meeting the needs and the social issues of LA. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about what is happening currently across our country with the Black Lives Matter and the protests that are happening throughout our country. I also would be remiss to tell you that there is a real moment here for older adults to do a great deal of mentoring. They have a history and an experience that needs to be shared in this moment, that is valuable in this moment, to learn from the failures that have been made and the successes that have been made, so that we can really understand the context of this moment and how we can move forward. So we will continue to engage in our community members to step up to these moments, to these pivoting moments, and to the needs of Los Angeles. And older adults will play an intrinsic role in that. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Joel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for those powerful words, and thank you to all of you for being here, and the Eisner Foundation for making our work possible. 826LA is a writing organization. That's the heart and soul of what we do. We want to help under-resourced youth throughout Los Angeles take ownership of their voices and to use writing as a tool to be creative, to be to share their very powerful stories with the world. That's really at the heart of our mission. And we do this by recruiting and training volunteers to provide this work or provide this service for free to students in schools throughout Los Angeles and inside of our centers. So the pictures I used here are of our two brick and mortar sites that exist on opposite ends of this very large city of Los Angeles. The one on the left is our Echo Park location, and the one on the right is the one in Mar Vista, which is closer to the ocean. Echo Park is more to the east side of LA. And these centers, as you can see, don't look like your typical centers of any kind. I don't know if you're familiar with our branding, but what we have at the entryway to our spaces are time travel stores. We believe that we should engage our communities and our students in a way that really honors creativity and honors who they are. And so we've created these fun stores to help us raise money, but also to help educate and connect with the community. In these stores, you'll find not only woolly mammoth meat in cans and Viking odorant to help you smell like a Viking when you travel back in time, but you'll also find books written by the thousands of young people who come through our doors and who we serve. Our space in the back of our center is really the writing center and the lab, where young people sit alongside of tutors who are as young as 16, but are also as old as 92, and who sit to work on homework when that's the program that's being offered, but then to also focus on some writing based on prompts that are designed for them. We also offer a variety of workshops on topics that range from writing for movies to Dungeons and Dragons, and even to writing for pets, where you learn about audience and you write stories that maybe for a dog or a cat or a parakeet, but you learn what words to use and what words not to use to keep those audiences engaged. We really believe in this creative world, and we want to keep it alive for our students. And so we work hard to build a community that is understanding and that is made up of lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds, age, race, ethnicity, and we believe that that's something that's missing in a lot of our communities, a place where people who come from different backgrounds can connect with each other in one place. We not only do these in these brick and mortar spaces, but we do them in the schools. A lot of our big comprehensive high schools, we have what are called writers' rooms, and we try to bring a little bit of this 826 LA style into a school. And we have 2 writers' rooms, one in South LA at Manual Arts High School, and one at in Roosevelt High School in Boyle Heights. And it's a space dedicated to writing, where teachers and students throughout the day can get support on all kinds of writing projects, from journalism to, we also bring in writers, well-known writers, to speak to students and to help get them excited about the process. In terms of our volunteers, and especially what we're talking about today, our older volunteers, we've always benefited tremendously. If you can go to the next slide, please. We've always benefited tremendously from the support of older volunteers. It's been part of our founding, it's been part of our DNA. It's our 15th year in Los Angeles. And, you know, we've always had a great number of folks who've been able to come in and spend time with our students, and not only that, but be the most consistent people that we have in our spaces at times. It's been a great asset to see these tutors who are older come in, and some of them for the last 10 to 12 years, who've seen students start as, you know, 7 or 8 year olds and then see them graduate to high school. It's been a wonderful thing to observe. Our volunteers, our older volunteers, senior volunteers, make up about 14% of the total hours that we provide students. This year we've been challenged, obviously, with the COVID-19 and the closures, but in a typical year, we serve up to 9,000 students throughout Los Angeles in our centers and at our schools. And we have about 1,200 volunteers on our roster who make that possible. And so we've seen in the senior population a 157% growth of the number of seniors who have come in for training and who are interested in volunteering with us. And that's thanks to support from groups like Eisner and a lot of the messaging and outreach that we've been able to do as a result of that. The H26LA continues to have a 100% activation rate with senior volunteers. That's all seniors who volunteer and who register to become active volunteers. We also have volunteers who contribute about 2,666 hours last year, senior volunteers who contributed 2,666 hours. A lot of the work we do too is really around helping volunteers, you know, understand the students, understand the current needs, and understanding even the current events happening. A lot of our trainings are around best practices. We also do a lot of trainings on diversity, equity, and inclusion to understand a lot of the new language and a lot of the new things that are being taught and that students are bringing to our organization. One of the things that we hold true to the DNA of our work is we believe students come with intelligence, they come with learning, they come with experience, and we want to help them build on that. We don't come with the attitude that we know more, that we're going to teach them something. We really want to facilitate and coach and guide and support students in the process of learning. And so we have to do a lot of training, and a lot of our seniors are very engaged in that process with us. And it does come up sometimes that maybe ways that people were more comfortable in how they feel about coaching or learning is a little different from the methods we use today. But those become points of communication and points of talking points that we were able to address and work with. But as Trent pointed out early on, seniors bring a serious calm and a wisdom to our spaces. Many of our students, the majority, in fact, almost all of our students are students of color, and a lot of them live in homes where there's a grandmother or multiple generations of families and other families living together. So it's something that they're used to, and they really appreciate the time when they come in and are able to speak with volunteers who are older and who can provide them a sense of security and connection. Next slide, please. And, you know, with the pivot that we've had to make now, like many organizations and like you heard from LA Works, you know, a lot of it is, it's all online right now. And so we've had to take all these programs and an organization that was really, you know, made to really work well on that one-to-one, face-to-face in one space connection to now move over to a digital space. And understanding, you know, that our students and our volunteers and our families and everybody is sort of learning how to live in this new digital space. We've had to spend a lot of time looking at that and training and retraining and helping build this. But even with that, from July, excuse me, since the time of since we broke out from COVID in about middle of March, we've connected with over 1,200 active volunteers, and we've worked to re-engage with them through phone calls, emails, communications that we've had. We've even had fun happy hours where we've had volunteers show up and we've celebrated them. We've done quiz shows as well. We've also done lots of training on how to work with students in this new space and how to engage with them properly. There's a lot of security measures we have to put in place when you have volunteers in a breakout room. If you're familiar with Zoom, that's a space that you can have separately to allow us to ensure that everyone is safe, that things that are observed on both ends are well cared for, and that we are ensuring that our guidelines are being followed. We are also doing a lot of trainings that are digital that we've created for volunteers of all ages, but also targeted towards older volunteers on how to use Zoom, how to take advantage of these new tools and be effective. We've also been reaching out to teachers throughout the district, about 400 LAUSD teachers, and we've also connected with 150 families that, you know, from 250 families that 200 of our students come from. And so we're always adding resources to our website, resource hubs for all our volunteers to take advantage of. Next slide, please. And specifically to support our older volunteers, you know, we have been providing a variety of virtual opportunities, some of which are live, like you saw in the Zoom conferencing, but also some which are asynchronous, which means students, a lot of volunteers are given work from students, writing from students, and are able to give feedback using Google Docs and other tech to help students, you know, think about their writing and maybe give them some advice on what direction to take. Of the volunteers who have participated in our live online programs, about 30%, a third of our volunteers doing this work are seniors. And for the remote editing projects, about 20% of those are seniors. We prepared written, visual, and video guides to using our technology that we shared with our entire volunteer base. Some of the challenges we faced are finding ways to increase the face-to-face interactions between volunteers and students. That is a challenge we have because of the technology and because of the limits in allowing folks to be unsupervised in a space. And so we're trying to figure out some of those challenges and have already come upon some great new ways to work with that. And, you know, our webinars and our virtual guidelines have been well attended, and we've been holding open office hours for volunteers to check in with us as they begin tutoring online. And so, you know, I had two things I'll leave with us here. I believe this is my last slide. But, you know, one of the challenges, I was on one of our tutoring sessions last week, and it was with one of our senior volunteers and a student, and I was observing. And what was challenging was not so much the senior volunteer, but it was really the student who sadly, you know, didn't have a computer that had a video, you know, where the video camera worked. They had to use their mom's phone and sort of, you know, hack some way to be online to get this support from the volunteer. And it took a good 20 minutes to help this child get to a stable place where we could then address and support him on his homework. And throughout this whole thing, our volunteer, Angie, who was, incredibly patient, and she was, the whole time, adhering to our guidelines and being supportive and trying to find a way to help this child, even with all these technical difficulties. But it's just one sort of example of the kind of patience that our volunteers bring to us. And the other is this volunteer here you see in the picture here. This is Margie, who's 79, and she took the initiative after one of our check-ins and one of our trainings to learn that she started to learn to use whiteboard on Zoom. And she wrote an email to us and saying, "I'm finally prepared for explaining fractions. I worked with a friend and I can draw nice circles with partitions on the whiteboard." We also, if I didn't mention earlier, help with homework, and math is a big need for our students. And so Margie is one of our lead volunteers on that. So thank you.
Well,
Thanks,
thank
Joel.
you so much, one and all. Back to you, Trent.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks, Joel. As we heard from you and Nahtahna, intergenerational programs are, in our opinion, truly a win-win. We are seeing older adults in Los Angeles and all over the country step up right now to help their communities, and we should continue to honor them for the great resource that they are. This not only encourages more engagement, but it also helps change the narrative around older adults in America. They are not passive recipients of services, though, of course, to many of you, those services continue to be painfully necessary and important. They are active community members with so much to give, and when we support organizations that put them to work, we are working to change how our society thinks about aging. I know, John, that you are about to begin the Q&A, but as the person who invited these two great nonprofits here today, if you will permit me, I just want to ask Joel and Nahtahna, and maybe Nahtahna, you can go first. You have an audience of funders here. What do you want them to take away from today's webinar?
Thank you for that question, Trent. I think what we really need to communicate is that we cannot do this work without funding. We were not able to do the telesocial work until we received the support from the Eisner Foundation. And we also know how important that work has been to our community in fighting social isolation during this time. And I know many of you on the call recognize that social isolation can be lethal. And so there is a relationship between volunteer engagement, intergenerational activities, and lifespan. And I do want to echo what Trent had mentioned. We often come from a deficit approach about older adults in America, but I really have seen firsthand at the front lines that older adults are not just receiving service, they're providing service, and they're providing significantly important service to meeting the needs of our community.
Yeah, thanks, Nahtahna. I said it beautifully. I would add that, I'm just really, I've been inspired by foundations, especially Eisner Foundation and others who've been really trusting of us and knowing that, we can make the best decisions in pivoting right now to support our seniors and to support our programming in order to provide the best environment. And these things take time and work, and it's good to know that, if an organization has the right tools in place, the right staff in place, that, trusting that they can pivot and make this work possible is really key, especially in a time like this where it's confusing, it's hard, it's, for us, it's, it's been a change in being able to go to schools and see students up front. And we know that, for our seniors especially, being at home, being by themselves, this is one way that they're able to connect with the community and that they're able to feel purposeful. And they need this kind of access, and they need the support and they need the training as well. But we also need their wisdom, and we want to engage them as much as we can. So that's all I'd say.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for your wonderful comments so far. We have a bunch of questions, and so I'd like to jump right into those. And I think the first one is really a follow-up to what both of you were talking about. But Joel, I'm going to direct it at you, and then everyone else can respond. And that is, right now, we're still in maybe the last stages of this first part of the coronavirus shutdown and social isolation process. But do you have a process in place, or what are you doing to try to think through where we're going to be in 3 months, 6 months, a year as various institutions reopen? Are you looking towards having older volunteers move back to the places they went, or are you still going to use the technologies that you've put in place?
Yeah, thank you. That's a question I am constantly thinking about. We're working with a task force of by the way, I didn't mention this, but we're part of it's like a franchise model. So we have 826s all around the nation, and there's about 10 of us now. And so we share a lot of resources, and we're able to think about this. We're also keeping our eye on what the school district is doing and how they're planning to open up again. I'm hearing a lot of talk about hybrid models. And so, right now we're planning on keeping it digital throughout the summer. And then in the fall, we are also looking at possibly a hybrid model where, our spaces will need to follow some rules around separation, around mask wearing, around having cleaning supplies, around cleaning regularly, around all those things that I'm sure everybody has come to know as regular, normal way of doing things. And then we'll have to see if possibly using the computers and digital, which is something in the past we didn't do, but it might be necessary for us to still have computers in the space to work, to have it for children if they need access to a volunteer who cannot because of preconditions or because they're older, who are more susceptible to this disease, to be able to work from home. So we'll continue to do workshops online. We may do some of them in our spaces as well. We're trying to figure out what's going to happen in the schools, because I know schools are going to be a little more, they're going to be stricter about who they allow inside. And so that's going to be a challenge that we'll have to think about. But maybe there is a way that we can bring in volunteers via computers to work with students in classrooms as a way to provide more services.
Thanks. Nahtahna, anything to add to that?
Yes, we're sort of approaching it with three different ways. We have written a best practice guide on how to bring volunteers back in a way that meets the nonprofit needs, with lots of suggestions. We've collected a lot of recommendations from different agencies, and we're going to offer that as a resource to our nonprofits. We're actually going to also host a workshop with our K-12 tutoring agencies to brainstorm with them on how we can re-engage volunteers with these new requirements. And then the final one is we'll continue our online employment workshops at home remotely, because those seem to be still useful and a way to protect our older adult volunteers.
Thank you. The next question is perhaps unfortunately even more relevant than it was even a month ago. But as you see from the photos and other things, many of your volunteers are older white persons, and many of the students that they're working with are children of color. Are you developing, or you do training specifically around those issues, helping the volunteers to understand the communities that they're serving? And could you say a little bit more about that?
I can jump on this one. Yes, I did note that when I was putting the slideshow together. It's certainly not representative of all of our volunteers and all of our senior volunteers. We're very cognizant of the need to bring in more volunteers of color to reflect the populations of students we serve. It's key, and we've been doing a lot of work towards that end in terms of our outreach, in terms of our training and education. And yeah, it is something we address, and we have trainings that are geared exactly at understanding our students and understanding where they come from, their perspectives. And it's, it can be challenging at times, and we have had very hard conversations, but that's where the learning happens. And so it's a big part of our work and what we try to bring to our volunteers for sure. And we have trainings that we've done in person. Obviously, we're going to be doing some digital ones coming up very soon. And it's probably one of our most popular trainings that folks attend. In terms of outreach, we've been working a lot with the schools we work with. They have a lot of alumni, and the alumni are folks of color who look a lot like the students we work with, and we've been bringing them in and building a pipeline to them. And so that's been a success for us in our writers' rooms, especially in the schools that we're working in.
Nahtahna?
So we actually keep data on what our volunteers, the demographics of our volunteers, and so we're constantly identifying where we are falling short. And our data actually indicates that we are falling short in bilingual speaking Latinx communities, which is really a failure on our end, specifically because the Los Angeles population has such a high population of Latinos. So we recognize where that failure is, and we work very hard strategically to recruit those people, especially bilingual, because so many of our service recipients, especially around wellness checks, are actually monolingual. So that's the first thing. And then we actually have a specific orientation before our work to talk a cultural competency orientation when about what is appropriate and what is inappropriate conversations. And that was actually a lesson learned because we ended up making quite a few missteps. So it is, I'm going to echo what Joel said, it is a work in progress. It is not something we have ignored. And we continue to work towards becoming better in that area.
Thanks so much. Trent, here's a question for you. Given that there are so few funders, maybe only one funder, like Eisner, that works exclusively on these intergenerational issues, what is it that you would advise GIA members and others to do? What kinds of services can an organization that has an interest in aging, for example, may not do programs that are with children as well? What kinds of things can they be looking to support in their communities that would support this general effort?
Yeah, thank you. I want to make sure that I'm clear that while we are the only foundation that we're aware of that invests solely in intergenerational programs, we obviously aren't the only foundation investing in intergenerational programs. And there are, a lot of great foundations out there. St. David's Foundation has just joined as a funder of intergenerational programs. The Retirement Research Foundation has added a new intergenerational focus. The Packard Foundation up in Santa Clara has been doing this for a really, really, really long time and has laid the way. So it's all we do, but we're not the only ones doing it. I just think that for funders, it's a tool. It doesn't have to be the be-all, end-all. And so I just want people to look at whatever it is you do and incorporate the idea of, is there a way to do this intergenerationally? We came to this originally in 2008 when our corpus declined dramatically, and we saw that we were able to serve both children at risk in Los Angeles County and seniors who were vulnerable by bringing them together through some of these great partners, and in effect making one grant when we couldn't afford to make two anymore. So I think if there's a will, there's a way. And so I just encourage people, whatever it is you're working in, whether it's aging, vulnerable populations, anti-racism, cleaning up the environment, whatever it may be, consider the possibility that perhaps doing it intergenerationally will have positive impacts for both you and for your grantees. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about ways to do that. So please contact me.
Thanks so much, Trent. I think we have time for probably one or two more questions, so we'll move on to that. Let's see. The next one is a person is saying, my organization is finding technology fatigue with our students, particularly those who are experiencing homelessness. Have you had any successes, or do you have ideas about motivating them, helping them, and so on? I think this is the stories that we're hearing about. Students, they're not able to access the libraries anymore, so they don't have access to equipment at all, and those kind of things. So what are you finding in your work? Nahtahna, let's direct that one at you to start.
Sure. I'm not sure if this is going to answer the question, but one of our new programs is actually going back to old programming, which is we actually have a pen pal program with one of our housing facilities where our volunteers are actually writing letters to people living in the housing facilities and to the youth. So I think with technology fatigue is real. I think we're all kind of experiencing that. And I think really staying flexible and learning how to pivot, going back to, there was a time when we did not have this technology. And what did we do then? We read and we went outside. So there might be real opportunities to readjust a programming if we can think of things a little differently.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing. Folks are definitely feeling fatigue, staff, volunteers, students. One of the things we did for volunteers is we put together a self-care kit, a sort of booklet that included quotes from students, resources, and all sorts of ways to sort of care for yourself when you're not on the computers. Something that I think is a good balance for folks to make sure that their days are not just in front of these screens. Another thing we've done is that we've noticed that attention spans are really limited for our kids. That more than an hour is just too much. So we've created programs and lots of instances during the week where we can provide them, but at shorter periods. Most of our programs are usually over 2 hours, so this has been a big switch for us. So adjustments like that have been important, and we're always open to feedback, and we try to make sure that we're understanding what is it that's working and not working for our volunteers of all ages, and we try to incorporate those as best we can.
Well, thanks so much. Several questions around, do you know of similar programs that are doing this kind of work in other parts of the country? Obviously, Joel, you talked about the 826 program being national. So could you talk a little bit about that and where people could find some other examples of these kinds of programs in their local area?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a site called 826 National. You can go on there and you can check out all the different chapters. We have in New York, Chicago, Boston, DC, New Orleans, Minnesota, and and so there's in Detroit as well. So we have San Francisco. Excuse me, I forgot that one. But we're all over the country, and actually all over the world too. We've inspired similar organizations throughout the world that are doing work like this, creating these writing centers to help students improve their academics and their writing skills. So I would search that out. Right.
Nahtahna, anything to add to that? Other national programs that you look at particularly as similar to the kind of work that you do?
So RSVP is a national program. Most cities will have either an RSVP program, a retired and senior volunteer program, a foster grandparents program. So these are all senior core programs. Most cities have them. You can actually go on the CNCS website to identify which cities in your which cities in your area have those programs. And then we also have sister agencies that are like us. So New York Cares, Hands On Atlanta, they're doing a lot right now, specifically responding to current crises. And it's really inspiring to see their work as well. So oftentimes it ends with either New York, and Points of Light actually will have, a list of agencies throughout the country that are similar to our volunteer mobilization in LA.
Thank you so much. At this point, although we have questions left, we're going to pivot and allow our speakers to give us their last words of wisdom before we let them go. So, Joel, let's start with you.
Thanks again for having me on this panel, and I appreciate the time. I would say, really, for us, it's about building community. And that community includes our students, our families, and obviously our volunteers. Our older volunteers make up a really important part of that community, and having them feel a part of that community is essential to this work. And that's where a lot of the time and energy goes. And we want to ensure that everyone feels safe, informed, prepared, and ready to engage, in person or digitally. It's critical to the work we do and to building trust within different generations, because, a lot of times people have their views of how some people are or can be, or read the news and then have certain perceptions based on that. So I think that this is really the important work of building community and understanding between different generations of folks.
Thanks so much. Nahtahna?
Okay, Joel, I'm going to steal basically what you said and just say, I think the health of our country is dependent on the social connections that can happen and that need to happen, and then the engagement that needs to happen. We all need each other, and we all need to understand and empathize. And the only way to do that is through connection and social connection. And volunteer engagement is really key to taking those steps forward.
Thanks a lot. Trent, you have the last word.
Thanks, John. I assume I'm preaching to the choir here with this particular group of folks, but I just want to urge us to resist the inclination to be ageist as we propose new solutions for our communities. We're talking about resuming life, getting back into the classroom, and I think we're telling older people, that's fine. Stay home, stay safe, stay out of the way. But we're in crisis, and nowhere is this more dire than in the lives of our children. And we need all hands on deck. So why would we tell people who we know have so much to offer to stay out of the way? It's insane. It's on us to figure out safe ways to do this, and people like Nahtahna and Joel are thinking about it every single day. But simply cutting older people out of the relief efforts, it's a mistake. It's going to a fire and not bringing the water. So we can do better. We need to stop seeing older adults as all the same and worse as victims, and see them as people who can help, who want to help, and it's malpractice on our part not to put them to work when we can do so safely. So I just want to make a pitch to all of us to do our best to include everyone, especially those who have a proven track record of helping in our efforts to get this country back on track.
Wonderful words, Trent. And I want to thank Trent Stan, Nahtahna Cabanes, and Joel Arquillos for your wonderful work today. And thank you for all you do to support both older adults and those of every generation during this crisis and beyond. I also want to thank the John A. Hartford Foundation for their support of this and all of our webinar series. We will be making today's presentation available to anyone who wishes it to view it later for free, including the slides and the audio. Please watch for an email to be sent within a few days, or you can look at our website. We do want to bring to your attention that we have a new webinar series starting on Tuesday, June the 9th. and it's entitled Why COVID-19 Preys on Older Adults, What the Science Says and Doesn't Say. And we're doing this in partnership with the nation's premier research organization of geriatric researchers, the American Federation for Aging Research. Please learn more about this and register if you have an interest. You can visit our website, giaaging.org, for that information. And finally, I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Please stay